The American empire is cracking, and the world just heard the sound of that first fracture echo to the halls of power, global markets, and political offices from Washington to Wall Street. The dollar, the symbol of U.S. dominance, its crown jewel, its global leash, is under attack. And the one lighting the fuse? China. Yes, China just launched a new currency, designed not simply as an alternative to the U.S. dollar, but as a replacement. And if that doesn't send a chill down the spine of every banker, senator, and hedge fund billionaire in America, they're either asleep or in deep, dangerous denial. Now, before some Fox News anchor screams communism, take a breath. This isn't about ideology. It's about power. Real, hard, global economic power. And for the first time in nearly a century, that power is beginning to shift, not gradually, not subtly, but with seismic speed. Professor Richard Wolff puts it plainly. We are witnessing the end of an era. The U.S. dollar, once untouchable, is now vulnerable. And not because someone invaded or dropped bombs or rigged an election, but because empires rot from within when they refuse to adapt. Let's get something straight. The dominance of the dollar was never just about economics. It was about control. Since the end of World War II, the dollar hasn't just been a currency. It's been a weapon, a throne, and a straitjacket all in one. The U.S. could sanction any nation it wanted, block trade, collapse economies. And all it had to do was pull a lever in Washington. That's how power has worked for the last 75 years. That's how the U.S. has managed to fund endless wars, offshore pollution, prop up its markets, and pretend that its deficits didn't matter, because the rest of the world needed dollars. But guess what? Not anymore. China just called America's bluff. They've spent years quietly, strategically, building their reserves, securing their trade deals, creating parallel financial institutions, and lining up a coalition of countries who are sick and tired of the U.S. playing economic cop, judge, and executioner. And now, that new currency is here, backed by actual commodities, supported by real production, strengthened by global partnerships. It's not some theoretical digital dream. It's real, and it's spreading. This isn't just a story about China. This is about the world's response to American arrogance. It's about how countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and even Europe are tired of being bullied, tired of being told who they can trade with, how they can bank, or what sanctions they must obey. The dollar has become a symbol of coercion, not cooperation. And China's new currency? It's a rejection of that entire model. Let's look at the pattern. Empires always fall the same way. First, they rise through innovation, production, and hard work. Then, they dominate with military and financial leverage. Then, they start believing their own propaganda. And finally, they collapse, not because they were conquered, but because they stopped listening. The British Empire once ruled the seas and economies with the pound sterling. But the sun set on that empire when its financial dominance crumbled. Now, it's America's turn. The dollar was built on the illusion of infinite demand. As long as the world kept trading in dollars, the U.S. could run trillion-dollar deficits and still look strong. It was a global credit card with no limit. But China's move is saying, your credit is maxed out. Now let's talk about what this means for real people. Because this isn't just some macroeconomic shift discussed at Davos cocktail parties. This is about you. It's about the cost of your groceries, your rent, your paycheck. Because when the dollar loses dominance, inflation explodes. Imports become more expensive. Interest rates spike. The stock market gets shaky. Your retirement? Not as safe as you thought. The housing market? Not as stable as you were told. Your wages? Nowhere near enough to keep up with rising costs. And meanwhile, the billionaires who created this mess, they'll have already moved their money offshore. And here's the real kicker. They'll blame you. They'll say it's your fault, that you wanted too much, that workers got greedy, that environmental regulations went too far, that immigrants crashed the system. They'll point fingers at everyone but themselves. But let's be clear, the rot started at the top. For decades, American elites hollowed out the real economy. They sent jobs overseas, gutted unions, deregulated everything. They replaced manufacturing with stock buybacks and called it growth. They built an economy on debt, speculation, and illusion, and then told working people it was their fault when it all came crashing down. And now that the world is walking away from the dollar, these same elites are acting shocked, as if the party would never end. But history says otherwise. The fall of the dollar is not some anomaly. It's a reversion to the mean. Every empire that thought it was eternal fell. Every currency that thought it was irreplaceable was replaced. The Roman denarius, the Spanish real, the Dutch guilder, the British pound, all once dominant, all eventually dethroned. What China is doing isn't just economic. It's existential. It's telling the world there's another way. We don't need Washington's permission anymore. And that message is resonating. Countries that have been under the thumb of U.S. sanctions are lining up to join this new system. Nations sick of IMF austerity and World Bank lectures are looking eastward. Even traditional U.S. allies are hedging their bets because they see what's coming. Now, is China perfect? Of course not. There are real concerns about surveillance, authoritarianism, and transparency. But let's not pretend the U.S. has any moral high ground left to stand on. Not after Iraq. Not after Wall Street's 2008 robbery. Not after Supreme Court that strips rights like it's flipping a light switch. Not after decades of supporting dictators when it suited American interests. The rest of the world has seen the hypocrisy. They've seen the inequality. They've seen the environmental destruction. And they're done waiting for America to change. This shift away from the dollar is not just a rejection of currency. It's a rejection of a system that worships profit over people, a system that traps developing nations in debt, a system that pretends to be democratic while concentrating power in the hands of unelected bankers and billionaires. But here's the silver lining. Richard Wolff makes it clear. This upheaval is not just a collapse. It's a chance to rebuild something better, a chance to organize, a chance to fight for a real democracy, economic, not just electoral, a chance to shift from extraction to sustainability, from monopolies to cooperation, from financialization to fairness. But that chance won't last forever. If working people don't rise to this moment, if we let fear paralyze us, if we cling to myths of American exceptionalism, we'll end up being the ones who suffer most. We'll be handed the bill, again. So now is the time, not to panic, but to organize, to educate ourselves, to demand a seat at the table, to push for transparency in our economic institutions, to build solidarity across borders, across classes, across struggles, because the old world is dying, but the new one is not guaranteed. It has to be built by us. We can no longer afford to be spectators to history. The collapse of dollar dominance is here. The era of unipolar control is ending. The game has changed. The mask is off. The empire is exposed. And the question now isn't whether the U.S. can claw back dominance. The question is whether we, the people, can use this moment to reshape the world into something more, just more democratic, more humane. This is our wake-up call. This is our moment of reckoning. The old system is crumbling, and if we don't move, the rubble will bury us. But if we do, we can build something extraordinary. A world where no single currency dictates destiny. Where economic systems serve the many, not the few. Where people, not profits, decide what kind of future we want to live in. Change is coming. The dollar's reign is ending. Now we decide what comes next. What China has done by launching its own alternative currency isn't just about economics, finance, or reserves. The dollar is falling. The empire is fading. But your voice is rising. Don't just watch history happen. Be part of it. Why'd have you checkmark subscribe to this channel for more fearless analysis from Richard Wolff and voices the mainstream media refuses to platform? For most of the global south, for Africa, Latin America, parts of Asia, the U.S. dollar was never a symbol of stability. It was a symbol of submission, a ticket to endless debt, the velvet glove over the iron fist of empire. You didn't just trade in dollars. You lived under them. And now, the world is walking away. And the timing couldn't be worse for Washington. At home, America is tearing itself apart, politically, culturally, economically. The gap between rich and poor has exploded. Entire cities are collapsing under the weight of inequality. Working-class people are drowning in medical debt, student loans, and wage stagnation. The middle class? It's not shrinking, it's being erased. And yet, while Americans can't afford insulin or rent, their government has poured trillions into wars, foreign military bases, bailouts for Wall Street, and defense contractors drunk on endless conflict. All of it made possible, only possible, because the U.S. dollar was the world's reserve currency. The world kept buying U.S. debt, and that debt kept the illusion alive. But when that demand vanishes, when countries begin to settle oil contracts, trade deals, and loans in something else, that illusion crumbles. Suddenly, the empire has to live within its means. Suddenly, the deficits matter. Suddenly, the bloated defense budget looks like what it truly is, a parasitic drain on a broken system that can no longer afford it. This isn't a doomsday scenario. This is reality knocking on the door of denial. And don't think the elites aren't preparing. While working people are told to tighten their belts, the billionaires are already moving their assets offshore. They're buying citizenships in New Zealand. They're hiding money in Caribbean banks. They're buying bunkers in the Rockies and villas in Tuscany. They know what's coming because they built the system. They extracted every drop of value from American labor. They gutted industries for short-term profit. They pushed globalization, deregulation, tax havens, and union busting. They funded think tanks and media outlets to convince the public it was all necessary. And now that the dollar, their golden goose, is dying, they'll leave you behind. They always do. They'll let your savings collapse. Your wages stagnate. Your benefits disappear. And they'll call it market correction. Meanwhile, the people who did none of this, the nurses, the truckers, the teachers, the factory workers, you'll pay the price. That's the real danger here. Not just the fall of the currency, but the continued sacrifice of everyday people to protect a dying system's last few years of privilege. But here's the thing. It doesn't have to be this way. What Richard Wolff is telling us, what this moment is screaming, is that collapse is also a beginning, that the fall of one empire opens a door to the rise of something better. But only if we seize it, only if we organize, only if we stop clinging to the myths that got us here. Because the myths are rotting. The myth that the U.S. economy is invincible. The myth that capitalism, this version of it, is the final form of human progress. The myth that power concentrated in a few hands will somehow trickle down. The myth that the dollar, the markets, the billionaires, and the banks will always save us. No, they won't. They're not saving us now. They're abandoning ship. And the question isn't will the system collapse? It's what rises in its place. Because make no mistake, something will. The vacuum left by the dollar's decline will be filled. By China? Maybe. By a new coalition of emerging economies? Possibly. But it could also be filled by us, by movements that demand justice, equity, and sustainability. We have a choice. We can be crushed under the weight of a falling empire, or we can build a new foundation while the old one crumbles. And that starts with rejecting the fatalism we've been taught. It starts with realizing that we're not powerless, that working people, when organized, when united, when aware, can reshape the world. It starts with asking the uncomfortable questions. Why should global trade be dictated by a handful of private banks? Why should economic policy be decided by billionaires and unelected technocrats? Why are we still letting fossil fuel giants and arms manufacturers decide the fate of the planet? These aren't conspiracies. These are facts, documented, detailed, and devastating. And now, with the dollar supremacy fading, with China rewriting the rules, the old guard is vulnerable. Their power is no longer absolute. Their narratives are breaking down, which means we have an opening to create local economies built on cooperation, not competition, an opening to democratize finance, to take it back from hedge funds and hand it to the people, an opening to build global solidarity with workers and other nations who are also sick of being exploited by transnational capital. This is a moment of clarity, if we're willing to face it, because if we don't act, someone else will, and it won't be the people, it won't be the unions, it won't be climate activists or teachers or nurses. It will be the next wave of tech billionaires, the next authoritarian populist, the next shiny new empire promising stability while enforcing obedience. We've seen that movie. We know how it ends. But there's a different ending still possible. One that doesn't begin in a boardroom, but in a classroom, a coffee shop, a picket line, a protest. One that begins with ordinary people refusing to be passive spectators to a crumbling system. Richard Wolff is right. This is our time to educate, to agitate, to build something new from the ashes of what no longer serves us. Because when future generations look back on this moment, they will ask one question. Did we cling to the sinking ship, too afraid to swim? Or did we rise up and build a lifeboat for everyone? The dollar is falling. The empire is fading. And history is watching what we do next. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for rescue. Don't wait for leaders who have no interest in saving you. Be the turning point. Because if the system is going to collapse anyway, let it collapse into something better. That slow, rising tension humming beneath the surface. It's not just the market shaking. It's the foundation of a world we were all taught to believe was immovable. That the U.S. dollar would reign forever. That American dominance was written in stone. That the global economy was too big, too smart, too advanced to ever break. And yet here we are. That illusion is breaking right now, and you can feel it in the price of your groceries. In the rent, that just when it began. In the paycheck, that doesn't stretch half as far as it used to. You're watching a system unravel in real time, and the people who build it, the ones who promised it would always work for you, they're already on the next plane out. Because this was never about stability. It was about control. The dollar didn't just earn global dominance. It was forced into the hands of the world. After World War II, with Europe in ruins and Asia rebuilding, the United States stepped into the spotlight and said, "We'll be the center now." The Bretton Woods system was signed, and the dollar became the measuring stick for everything: oil, gold, trade, debt. That wasn't economics. That was empire. And for a while it worked. As long as America kept producing, kept innovating, kept feeding the machine of industrial might and technological progress, the world bought in. The dollar was strong because the engine behind it was roaring. But then the outsourcing began. The financialization took over. Factories shut down, replaced with boardroom spreadsheets and offshore tax shelters. The real economy, the one that builds, that makes, that matters, was gutted. And the dollar? It stayed on top, not because of strength, but because of habit, inertia, and fear. Fear of instability. Fear of the unknown. Fear of what might happen if the dollar didn't run the show. But fear doesn't last forever. China knows that. And now, so does the rest of the world. Because what China has launched is not just a currency. It's an escape hatch, a signal fire, a flashing sign that says, there's another way. And the countries that have been burned by the dollar, burned by U.S. sanctions, by IMF loan conditions, by World Bank austerity, they're listening. They've watched their schools crumble while paying interest on loans issued in dollars. They watched their farmland be sold off to foreign investors just to balance trade deficits denominated in dollars. They watched as their sovereignty was chipped away, transaction by transaction, year by year. And now they're ready to leave. And it's not just China pulling the strings. It's Brazil. It's South Africa. It's Iran. It's the countries who've asked again and again, why should our future be dictated by decisions made in Washington? That's the heart of this story. Sovereignty. China isn't offering its new currency as a charity. It's offering it as a tool, a path to independence, a way to break free from the stranglehold of dollar diplomacy. And that message, it's electric. It's revolutionary. It's spreading. This isn't a war fought with missiles. It's fought with spreadsheets, with trade agreements, with bilateral deals that cut out the dollar entirely. And with every transaction settled in an alternative currency, the dollar's armor weakens. A crack here, a fissure there, until one day, the dam breaks. And when it does, the consequences for America are catastrophic. No more borrowing without consequences. No more running up trillion-dollar deficits on the backs of countries forced to buy your debt. No more printing money to solve crises that were manufactured by the very system you refuse to reform. No more global ATM with endless overdraft protection. When the dollar falls from its pedestal, the bill comes due, and it won't be the billionaires footing the tab. It'll be you. It'll be the working class, forced to shoulder the cost of a collapsing currency. It'll be the single parent watching their rent double in a year. It'll be the teacher whose pension is suddenly worth half of what it was. It'll be the factory worker who's told, once again, to tighten the belt while the CEO buys a third yacht. And the most brutal part? We knew this was coming. The economists knew. The policymakers knew. The think tanks, the banks, the hedge fund managers, they all knew. But instead of preparing for a future with shared power, with multilateral currency systems, with a reformed global economy rooted in fairness, they clung to the myth of American exceptionalism like it was a life raft made of lead. They thought if they shouted freedom loud enough, the rest of the world would just nod along. But the world didn't nod. It left. And now, here we are, watching history unfold in real time, watching a new currency rise. Not because it's perfect, not because China is a benevolent actor, but because the dollar became too dangerous to trust. Richard Wolff makes the point crystal clear. No empire lasts forever. Not Rome, not Britain, not America, and certainly not the dollar. And when those empires fall, it's not always bombs and battles. Sometimes it's quieter, slower. It's a shift in how people think, a shift in what they believe is possible, a slow erosion of authority until, finally, the tower collapses under the weight of its own lies. But this collapse, it's not the end. It's a beginning, if we have the courage to make it one. Because the end of the dollar's dominance is also the end of one way of thinking, a chance to rewrite the rules, to build an economy that serves people, not profits, that protects the planet, not shareholders, that values democracy over monopolies. It's the chance to stop asking, how do we save the system? And start asking, what kind of world do we want to build? And make no mistake, there is a choice. We can let the collapse be a catastrophe. Let the billionaires rewrite the rules in their favor. Again, let the banks get bailed out while communities crumble. Let fear dominate our future. Or we can fight. We can fight for local economies, for public banks, for worker-owned businesses, for universal services that aren't tied to the whims of a volatile currency. We can demand that energy, housing, healthcare, and education are treated as rights, not commodities. We can demand a global economy based on cooperation, not competition. We can demand a system where value is created by people, not extracted from them. This isn't idealism. It's survival. Because the path we're on, it's already breaking. The dollar is no longer the anchor it once was. And clinging to it like a holy relic won't stop the water from rising. So what do? We organize. We educate. We mobilize. We build power from the bottom up. Because if we don't, the people who broke the world will build it back in their image. Again. And next time, there may be no coming back. So take this moment seriously. Understand what's at stake. Understand what's possible. Because the fall of the dollar is not the end of the world, but it is the end of their world. And now, we get to decide what comes next.